Yes, Tom, you wanted to see me. I announced my arrival at the managing director's office, having been signaled by him. Yes, thanks for coming, Mike, he replied with a smile, getting up from his desk. I'd like you to meet George, whose company has taken an interest in our new gearbox. Nice to meet you, I replied, extending my hand in greeting as he started to rise from his seat to meet my gaze. And then I stopped, as they say, on the spot. Mike, George Campion grunted in surprise. Mr. Campion, I replied formally, equally surprised, and lowered my hand again. Do you two know each other? Tom grinned, apparently not noticing the hostility that existed between us. Or maybe we were just too shocked to openly display it. How do you two know each other? Mike worked for me a few years ago. Campion, or George as I'd always known him, beat me to it, telling the truth but omitting the other, more controversial connection. That'll make things easier, Tom continued. A brilliant engineer, but never known for his people skills, and still not realizing how uncomfortable the other two men in his office had suddenly become. Perhaps you'd like to show George our production area. Maybe I will, I muttered, turned my back on Campion and headed for the door, leaving it up to him to decide whether or not to follow me. He followed. I suppose he had to, and I strode quickly down the hallway, hoping he'd keep up with me and intending not to stop until we were outside the office at the edge of the parking lot and alone. So, what the hell are you doing here? I growled angrily, turning to face him, not the least bit bothered by the fact that he was bigger than me, and apparently in every way, which was probably the root cause of the tension between us. I swear, Mike, I had no idea you worked here, he sighed, raising his hands in a peace sign. We haven't heard from you in years. We weren't even sure you were still alive. Thanks to you, I'm almost not, I snapped back, wondering why I didn't just nail this guy like I should have done all those years ago, back in the days when I had all my fingers. Sorry, he sighed, shrugging his shoulders. What else can I say? I stared at him, fighting the urge to allow myself at least one punch that would send him crashing to the floor and he wouldn't be able to get up for a long time. He knew it too and stood there, nervous but making no move to defend himself. If he had known how much easier I could hurt him than the last time we met, he probably wouldn't have done it. If he'd known what I'd gotten myself into over the years, he probably wouldn't have even done it and gone to finish watching the horizon. It's history, Mike. He broke the silence, nearly choking on the words. A lot of water has flowed off the bridge since then. And a lot of blood, I muttered to myself, gritting my teeth but feeling my inner rage subside until I felt myself breathing calmly again. Too bad none of them were yours. How's that bitch? Fine, Campion replied laconically, ignoring the insult I'd hurled at his wife and not wanting to talk about her anymore. Apparently, all was not well in Campion's family, and that didn't disappoint me in the least. And child? She's fine too, Mike, he replied, suddenly brightening up and risking a smile. Ginny's 4 years old now, and she's a happy and beautiful little girl. So who did she take after? The big question, the one the elephant in the room would have asked had it been there. She took after Jenny's example, Campion answered confidently. And not on me? Not exactly. And you? Not in a way you'd notice, he replied calmly. That's right. We better go check out the factory, I muttered, turned my back on the bastard, and strode away, again not paying attention to whether he was following me or not. I went to a top university and graduated with a good degree in engineering, but at the time I didn't know what career to choose. I think I was as surprised as anyone when I was attracted by the Army recruits who visited our university in my final year, and even more so when I enlisted for short-term service in the Royal Engineers. I immediately became an officer and committed to 3 years of service to the Queen, with the option to make it permanent or not at the end of the term. Those turned out to be the 3 best years of my life, despite the fact that there were no major conflicts during that time, or perhaps because the sense of camaraderie was like nothing I had ever experienced. I made captain, but at the end of my 3 years of service, despite all attempts to convince me to stay, I decided that I did not consider the Army my calling. In truth, it was hard for me to imagine killing anyone if hostilities broke out, which they surely would at some point, and I was in a position where I would have to do so. This was in spite of the fact that my skill with weapons, especially a pistol, surprised me. If only I had known at the time how easy it was to use a gun in a real situation, I might not have gotten away so easily. After leaving the Army and getting over the hangovers that my coworkers saw fit to give me as a discharge present, I discovered that 3 years of service had not gone to waste. Time spent in the field in a tank recovery unit and my engineering skills got me a job with one of the companies that made them. Maybe not exactly tanks, but a whole range of armored vehicles that became increasingly necessary as conflicts in the Middle East and elsewhere heated up. I was never a pure engineer, more of a troubleshooting and making things work kind of guy. And this, plus my army time, made me the perfect cover when dealing with our customers, both British and from other countries, often in bloody awful places. Life was great, and soon got even better when I caught the eye of Jenny, the boss's assistant, and even more so when we discovered it was mutual. 3 dates, and we both turned out not to be virgins, but without too many questions, we found ourselves a very comfortable match in my very comfortable bed. 6 more months and lots of time in bed, and I popped the question. She gave the appropriate answer, and we became Mr. and Mrs. Mike Jones. My seemingly happy and relatively carefree life continued. We settled into a new house, albeit with a huge mortgage, and 2 years later I was informed that I would soon be a father. Oh, the bliss! We hadn't planned for it, but as Jenny's lump was just starting to show, my joy grew and the whole world seemed perfect. And suddenly it wasn't. There's something you should know, Mike, Jenny surprised me one evening. What's wrong, honey? I asked, admiring her soft blonde hair and stroking it. It's the baby, Jenny murmured. What's wrong with it? I demanded, suddenly panicked at what she was about to tell me. Nothing, she snapped back, confusing me. So there's nothing wrong with our baby. What's the problem? That's the problem, Jenny sighed. It might not be our baby. Nonsense, I laughed, wondering what she could be thinking. Of course it's our baby. I mean, honey, my wife whispered, a tear rolling down her cheek. It might not be your baby. I stopped laughing, and even stopped breathing. I'm sorry, Mike, but I just couldn't hold back any longer. Who's the father? I demanded, holding back tears. It could be you, Mike, she dodged the obvious question. Or? Came out of my mouth, and I nearly choked on the word. George, she sobbed. And that was the death knell for our marriage. George was, of course, none other than George Campion, her boss and my boss at the time. When did it start? I asked, nearly sobbing. But that wasn't the question I should have asked. Rather, the fact was that they just never stopped. They didn't stop when we first started dating, and only subsided a bit after we got married. My wife had been having fun with our boss since her 19th birthday, when Campion had invited her to a party and ended up seducing her. Not surprisingly, she decided it would be best if we didn't tell each other about our previous history. That night my life changed, myself changed, and perhaps, as some would conclude, not for the better. Perhaps it would have been better if I had gone and beaten the bastard up and gotten over it, and then maybe I wouldn't have subsequently committed other behaviors I wasn't so proud of. Perhaps my decision was influenced by the fact that he too was ex-military, but not an engineer, but a Royal Marine and the heavyweight champion of the combined forces. That, and what I discovered when I broke into his office the next afternoon. Instead, I took the easy route and left my wife and told his wife what was going on between our spouses. Both divorces turned out to be surprisingly quick and dirty, despite the lack of children. Ours was much less serious. There wasn't even a question of paternity when Jenny and Campion moved in together quickly once his wife kicked him out, and he took responsibility for the child. It wasn't until later that I realized the interest he had in the children of other employees, but not having children of his own, perhaps it had come to his consciousness. Or maybe it didn't, and it was just my imagination. It's not my problem now. At least I have a house, albeit with virtually no equity because of the mortgage. It's hard to believe now that I so easily turned my back on what could have been my child. I guess I just didn't think about the possibility. I drank, or at least I started drinking, but memories of hangovers after being discharged from the Army kept me from excessive libations during my job search. Army? Why not? As it turned out, the why not was that they weren't really interested in a returning officer running away from a broken marriage. I was pissed, but truth be told, the signals I was signaling at the time were hardly appropriate for me. Don't laugh, but I considered joining the French Foreign Legion, but didn't immediately realize that would have been a disaster, so I went back to square one. No job, no plans, no home that I couldn't afford and hated anyway. I assessed my situation, realizing that while I was a young man, my entire career had been in the military or military hardware, and listed all my contacts that came to mind to decide which ones might be useful, if any. Most of them fell by the wayside since I was hardly going to be a civil servant, and governments in countries like Nigeria don't need people like me. There was one name I hesitated to put on the list, but then kept coming back to it. Old Mike would have crossed it out and taken an eraser, but new Mike didn't. Would I have? Would I have been able to? Hey, Carl. I started the phone conversation and introduced myself, surprised at how quickly he invited me over. What went wrong in your life? What do you even think about it? Carl asked indifferently. I told him, and he only nodded. He didn't seem to care about it any more than the British Army did. You made captain? He asked, and I confirmed that I had. Did you serve? Followed the next question, and I was forced to admit that I had not. A qualified engineer? I think the question was taken in the affirmative. Rifleman level with a rifle and submachine gun. It's rare to find an officer capable of marksmanship. He laughed at his own joke. His next question, however, made me freeze for a moment. You've never shot anyone. If it came to a critical situation, would you be able to? Yes, I answered, trying not to give away the tremor in my voice. The image of Campion in my scope helped me a lot. Well, maybe you'll find out if you really can, Carl snapped back. Because if you can't, you probably won't get your reward in time. That's how I became a mercenary. A soldier of fortune. Weapons for hire, or in my case, a gun. A set of wrenches and a theodolite. After renting a house for an extended period of time, I found myself on a plane bound for the Middle East to be part of a multinational squad to protect a leader in the Middle East. I'll call him King because he was. At least sort of. Although some might have felt that his work in defense of the civil rights of his people left much to be desired. The West couldn't openly support him, but he was a bastion against the rise of Islamic forces that threatened even worse things. And that's where we mercenaries came to the rescue. My job in the small unit was to monitor and maintain our equipment, which didn't seem too dangerous and remained so for quite some time. When it did, it came without warning and was a personal test for me to see if I could freeze or not. It was also a test to see if I could keep my promise to Carl in the UK. The armored personnel carrier drove past our workshop without even noticing us, and we didn't pay much attention to it either. It was only when the engine roared and the vehicle rolled straight toward the gate to the courtyard where the king's quarters were located, breaking through the first barrier and crashing right into the anti-tank barriers, that the armored personnel carrier stopped with a crash, and about a dozen heavily armed combat soldiers poured out of it. Firing short, precise bursts at the captured guards, they veered to the left to shoot and kill as many as possible as quickly as possible, and a couple of grenades discouraged the others from leaving the safety of the barracks. They then regrouped and headed back towards the royal quarters, taking out two ceremonial guardsmen whose swords were no match for their automatic weapons. All I had was my arm, and the same could be said for the three mechanics who, bless their cotton socks, proved brave or foolish enough to follow my lead. Had we faced them head-on, we would have been wiped out in seconds, but by sheer luck or will of fate, because it certainly wasn't due to military cunning, we attacked them from the side as they rushed back across the corral with only limited cover in the form of the machine we were working on. Without hesitation, I got down on one knee, calmly took the automatic off the safety, took aim, and opened aimed fire, not wasting more than one bullet on each of the creepers before switching to the next. Fortunately, though apparently not entirely successfully, 3 of my men followed suit, and in a matter of moments we had wiped out 6 of them and at least a couple more who were looking for escape. But it was too late, because by then the rest of the soldiers had recovered from their surprise and showered them with a hail of bullets. Silence. Such silence that it was shocking. The horrifying cacophony of death subsided as quickly as it had begun, and the rest of us, like me, watched the carnage, marveling that any of us were unharmed. Then came the shock. Different people deal with the aftermath of battle in different ways. Some seek solitude, others just want to kick themselves. I was the former, and it wasn't very pleasant. I bit the head off the unit commander as he clapped me on the back and congratulated me heartily. Not normally a very sensible thing to do, since he was a former Special Forces guy who probably had 3 ways to kill me just by smiling. He did smile, but not like that. He just told me to report to him when I got my wound dressed. What? I raised my hand to touch my cheek, which was starting to hurt by then, but my hand was covered in blood. Just a wound. He brushed off my problem. When it heals, you'll look like a pirate. Women will love that. He understood. He'd certainly seen it all before. What a show you put on, Mike. He greeted me an hour later as I stood before him, a major, in his office, my wound patched, but still sore. I had 3 good men with me, sir, I replied. They did a good job, Mike, he grinned. But it looks like you personally took down 5 of them with that little damn gun. Screw it, I missed one of them, I replied, and we laughed. It wasn't actually very funny, but finally the tension I had no way of releasing was gone, and the two of us laughed heartily at a very unfortunate joke. Seriously, Mike, he interrupted the fun. Where the hell did you learn to shoot like that? In the British Army, I shrugged. It all worked itself out. What the world has come to, he sighed. A bloody engineer with a sense of humor who can shoot accurately. What's next? I knew better than to answer, so I just smirked back at him. A compliment, even a perverse one, from a senior comrade with his track record is not something to be taken lightly. The king has confirmed the reward for the 4 of you, he announced, surprising me. 3 of your men will each be able to buy a new car. I could use a new car, sir, I replied, feeling the meeting becoming increasingly informal. The men will have to think about a Ford, and you can think about a Jaguar, Mike, he grinned, and just when I thought I was about to be let go, he suddenly became serious again. Mike, have you ever been to Africa? He asked sharply. 3 weeks on a business trip in Kenya and a vacation in Morocco, I replied, generally unimpressed. Central Africa, he continued, almost growling. They need an engineer there, and it will be twice as profitable. Why would that be? I asked, already guessing the answer. Simple arithmetic, my boy, he grinned, relaxing again. Twice the risk, twice the money, and a bonus if our client wins that day that would make your mouth water. Twice the risk? More like 3 times, the major admitted. Our man is trying to overthrow some bloodthirsty despot who won't go away. And our man? Omar, the current leader's cousin, and apparently not much better than him, but he and his supporters are the ones paying the price. Sounds fair, I nodded in agreement, which didn't seem unreasonable. But why do they need me? They need engineering experience, and the previous 2 didn't last long, he informed me, becoming serious again, which was a sure sign of what could happen to them. This time they need someone who can take care of themselves, someone who can shoot accurately and won't hesitate when it comes to a fight. When do I leave? Damn, I really wasn't the same Mike I'd been not too long ago. So a few days later, with enough money in the bank to buy a Ferrari, I and 5 other people were on an executive jet headed to Dubai for various connections. The others were headed to Europe and possibly beyond, and I was headed to some god-forsaken country in Central Africa, somewhere east of Nigeria and north of South Africa. I had a 2-hour layover on the way, but I was facing a 4-day layover, which was described as a vacation, but I suspect more likely due to a lack of people willing to fly where I was going. The hotel, however, was fine, and soon I was sitting on the balcony of the 5-star Grosvenor Hotel, holding a glass of something in my hand. After a quick dinner, I went to one of the clubs recommended to me by the hotel, where I discovered that my scar gave me an unattractive look that made other guys walk towards me. As my former boss suggested, it also acted as a magnet for women, or maybe it was the money I was waving around. As it happened, I ended up getting a professional, tall Russian blonde who proved that money was worth money. All was well and even better than I had hoped. However, the beautiful new romance ended after breakfast the next morning when Olga, the new, albeit temporary love of my life, took my money, kissed me, and left me her business card. The next day was devoted to exploring Dubai. A boat ride, a visit to the rugby field, where my uncle had played 10 years before, and even 2 new shirts that were made for me in 24 hours by tailors on the outskirts of the city. After returning to the hotel and taking a relaxing shower, I took the long elevator downstairs, intending to have dinner at one of the hotel's excellent restaurants and spend another night in the city. This night started very differently from the previous one, except that the girl was Indian, from Kerala, not busty, exquisitely beautiful, but different. Maybe I'll hold you up, Neha said. Where did you get the scar? She asked at last, and the novelty of the question became apparent. From a terrorist's bullet, I replied, grinning and surprised when I realized I was actually telling the truth. Sort of. Take the other one out, Neha laughed, realizing I was joking. You probably got your cheek caught on a nail or something. Do you want to see my other wounds? I asked. Where are they? She giggled. Where I can't show you in public, I replied, lying that I didn't really have any, except for a scratch on my knee where I hit a table a few days ago. My hotel is right down the road, I challenged her. What are you waiting for? My petite Indian beauty accepted the challenge, took my hand in hers, and led me through the crowded room straight to the exit. Well, here we are, I finally sighed. Mike Jones, a big smart guy standing at the entrance, asked. Who's asking? Was my obvious answer when asked such things in places like this. Carl sent me, and there's a plane waiting for you at the airport standing on the tarmac. You've got to be kidding me, I growled in frustration. I'm sorry, but I'm being serious, Captain Jones. I'm afraid you'll have to take your extra charge another time. I'll have to get my things out of my room, I remarked, hoping I'd get to fondle the gorgeous Neha at least a little. Your things are already packed and in the car, Captain. He spoiled my plan. Sorry, but the plane is really waiting. There are 2 other guys looking for you. So it really was a bullet wound. Neha spoke for the first time, looking at me with a slightly different look. She almost missed, was all I could think of to say. She almost destroyed you, Neha remarked. Sorry, but the plane is actually waiting on the tarmac, Captain, the man repeated, trying not to give away his excitement, and I hugged Neha with an exaggerated sigh, kissed her, and then had to let go. My card, Mike, she said, holding out a very chic-looking business card to me. Stop by and see me next time you're here. And so it went. I was being driven away in a huge black Mercedes, trying to forget what pleasures I had just missed, and the beautiful Neha waved me goodbye. Excuse me, Captain. A man who didn't give his name spoke up after a while. Some woman, this Neha. Do you know her? I replied in surprise. Only by sight and reputation, unfortunately, he grinned back. She would be a good catch for any man. But she only works in a restaurant, I muttered, looking at the business card she'd given me. Look again, he commanded. And I looked. Jesus, I replied, she's the manager. She only looks 20. She's 27, he informed me, amused by my surprise. To us Europeans, Indian girls usually look young, and she not only manages the restaurant, but her family owns it, and it's one of the best restaurants in Dubai. They have establishments in half the capitals in the world. Not a bad find, I sighed. And that was the end of our conversation, and I began to ponder if I was doing the right thing. The airplane was indeed waiting for us on the tarmac when we arrived at the site, and to be honest, my first thoughts were whether or not it would even be able to leave. It turned out to be the Eastern European equivalent of a DC-3 Dakota, but not as beautiful or even half as well preserved as the DC-3S I'd seen. I didn't panic, but I was curious as hell, and my first impression of the pilot did little to dissuade me. He, Vladimir, looked like something left over from World War II, which this airplane may well have belonged to, and his conversation left a lot to be desired. How wrong was I? By then I knew a little about questionable airplanes, drunks, and even worse pilots, but Vladimir, despite his lack of conversational skills, appeared to be a master at the wheel of his machine. I joined the 3 other passengers already aboard the plane, but got nothing but grunts from 2 of them and a look of pure hatred from the 3rd. Perhaps they were angry at me for keeping them waiting. The takeoff went normally, and the sound of twin engines told me that the beast was probably in better condition than its appearance would suggest. Perhaps there was some reason for this, but I decided it was best not to consider what it might be. For several hours we flew without uttering a word, although the noise the airplane was making would have made it difficult to do so. Then the nose of the plane dipped, it wobbled, and I realized we had landed, only because the pilot was unlikely to turn off the engines if we were still in the air. And I was so hopeful. Vladimir climbed back in, told me to stay put, opened the door and kicked out the other 3, who flew off without much enthusiasm. And to this day I don't know who they were or what country we left them in. My faithful pilot climbed back on the fuselage, handed me half a bottle of vodka, honored me with a peculiar smile, and returned to the cockpit. 10 minutes later we were rushing down the unfamiliar runway again, and then we took off like a bird. With no one to talk to and not enough light to read by, I reluctantly let my thoughts drift back to the day Jenny had dropped her bombshell, and also to what I'd discovered when I'd gone to meet the damned Campion. I jumped out of the house, horrified at the thought of what might happen if I stayed. By the time I got home that night, already somewhat thinner, Jenny was already in bed and I was asleep on the couch. She had gotten up before me and apparently decided not to wake me up. Perhaps that was a mistake on her part, because if she had woken up, we might have gotten somewhere. Eventually, I got up, showered, got dressed, and then sat there wondering what the hell to do next. My beautiful little world had been shattered, and shattered by the person I loved most in the world. During lunch, I went to get dog hair after needlessly biting the head off an overly talkative bartender. It was then that I made the decision to go and meet George Campion. To get his side of the story, though I had no idea how that would help. Perhaps I had something else in mind. I made my way to the factory and past the guards at the gate, half expecting them to deny me entry when I showed them my pass. Once inside, I nodded to the receptionist and a few co-workers, almost not understanding how they could act so normal when the world had changed so drastically. I didn't go into my office but headed straight for the director's suite, ignoring the woman behind the counter who flew by and barely audibly telling her that Mr. Campion was busy and couldn't be disturbed. Maybe it was for the best. Swinging the door open, I stepped inside and froze. Campion was indeed in attendance, presumably in a meeting with the other three principals, so it was no surprise that his assistant was also present. All three men were dressed as one would expect, formally. Even the ties were out of place. The assistant, Jenny, my wife of course, was wearing high-heeled shoes, a pair of not-too-flashy earrings, and that was it. "Shit!" growled Campion, spotting me, and everyone else in the room, including me, fell shocked silent. "Nothing's going on," Jenny sighed, which seemed rather silly to me as she stood surrounded by four fully dressed men. "It's not what you think, Mike," she pleaded, tears already rolling down her cheeks as she took a step toward me. Finally, I felt the engines of the DC-3-like airplane stall again. The nose lowered, and I made a flawless landing again, which, considering the condition of the grass strip that awaited me as I exited, the plane was no small accomplishment. In the dim light, I found myself on the edge of the runway under the cover of the surrounding foliage, only to hear the roar of the airplane's engines as it descended back onto the grass strip and into the air. I was about to ask why it flew away so quickly when I got my answer. A shell, probably a mortar shell, exploded a couple hundred yards from where I was standing, with a blinding flash. It didn't hit the airplane, but the second one might well have. "Let's get out of here," my guide suggested. "And by the way, welcome to hell." I didn't need a second invitation, and it was truly horrible. We lived in tents that we had to move frequently so they wouldn't notice us. The temperature was a little lower than in the Middle East, but with the high humidity, it was almost unbearable. There were insects everywhere, some as big as chickens. I exaggerate about chickens, of course, but you get the point. Besides, we were being shelled regularly, and the enemy was trying to gain a foothold in our territory. Now, it was not a good time to say that things were not going well, although I quickly realized it myself. The doubling of my salary lost its luster pretty quickly, and the prospect of a mouth-watering bonus seemed no fun. The problem, of course, was that you couldn't just say, "I've changed my mind, please take me home." If I wanted to back out, I'd have to try to survive the 6 months I'd signed up for and pray that Vladimir and his old airplane were intact, or hope things would change. It got better, and then it got worse again. My team of mechanics, some of whom were locals, a German, 2 Frenchmen, and 2 guys of dubious origin, had pretty much lost enthusiasm for their work. More accurately, they were pissed off and doubted they would ever see any form of civilization again. Their future didn't look too bright. If I wanted to get out of this situation in one piece, I had to give them some hope, and that wasn't easy. We looked around the base, and I was surprised to find that our man Oma was indeed with us, though I half expected him to be somewhere in the palace, staying out of the fighting. Perhaps he's not so bad after all. It soon became apparent that most of our heavy guns were out of action, or as my French commander told me, HS, and there were no spares to get them back in working order. Without them, we had no serious answer to the attacks of the thugs, as the enemy on our side was called. They were certainly beginning to realize this, and their attacks were becoming more brazen and direct. "You've seen the problem, Captain, and what the hell can you do about it?" Those were the first words Oma said to me as I was brought to him, and he sat surrounded by 2 senior officers, one black and one white. "Well, I can put in 1 more medium machine gun if I destroy all the others, but then they'll all be written off. Same with the mortars, though they'll have to be adapted since they're all malfunctioning. I might be able to get this old 75mm one to work, but I doubt it. That's about what your predecessor said, but he never succeeded, remarked the white officer. He didn't live long enough to find that out, the black man remarked, not too encouragingly. That's still not enough, Oma remarked, smiling in spite of the bad position he was in. We need more. We don't have more, grumbled the white man, who was starting to like me. Maybe there is a way, I sighed, almost regretting my silence, and soon found all three of them staring at me, waiting for me to tell them how I was going to accomplish the impossible. Russian heavy machine guns have basically the same problem. It's a part of the trigger mechanism that has failed. If I had 5 of those machine guns, you'd have 5 more heavy machine guns. We don't have 5 spare triggers, you fool, White snapped back. But we can make them, I suggested. There's a lathe and other equipment in the shop, and Renee claims to have experience with it. It might be possible. What's the problem? Omak asked, smiling obediently, but knowing full well that there was more to it. We need a template, I sighed. The others are all cracked and uneven. We don't have a template, my concerned boyfriend, whose name I hadn't even been told, muttered. I think we do, Oma sighed, guessing what I was implying. We still have the last of those guns working. No way in hell, the officer shouted. It's the only thing still working properly. Without it, we're screwed. So there's no way you're taking it apart. Without the extra firepower, we're screwed anyway, commented the officer in the black uniform. Do it, Captain Jones, I ordered. Let's pray we manage to hold them off. When a situation hits rock bottom, real men come to the forefront and change the course of history. At least that's what happens in the movies. Unfortunately, it's not like that in real life, and if things are bad, they're likely to get worse, and my brilliant idea turned out to be a complete failure. We removed the mechanism from the last working machine gun and hurriedly returned it to the workshop, where another non-working machine gun was waiting for us, intending to return it to the perimeter line as soon as we had successfully made a replica. Unfortunately, we then discovered that Renee might not be as proficient with the lathe as we had assumed, or the metal we were using wasn't good enough. So he gave it a try. He made 3 parts. 2 didn't fit, and the third broke in half when we tried to put it back into the machine gun. We stood there with our heads bowed, wondering what to do next, not realizing that the situation could get worse, when suddenly it did. The sudden burst of fire meant that there was another attack on our position, and we all fell silent, hoping that it would subside, and that it was just a small skirmish because otherwise no cavalry would come to rescue us. I looked around my group of 8 mechanics and saw every emotion from despair to calm acceptance of our fate, for they all looked to me as leader. Our defensive fire was certainly instantaneous, but without the heavier machine gun, the difference was obvious even to us. Obvious and heartbreaking as we looked at the defensive perimeter behind a line of dense trees and brush, no more than 200 meters from where we waited, knowing that violent death was on its way. Merde! Shouted Renee, as we heard the hiss and silence of our only remaining medium gun, and the remaining crackle of rifle fire seemed so pathetic. They're breaking through, one of my men remarked. They're going to overtake us. You cannot imagine what that remark, however obvious, can do to you. We all knew what it meant. There would be no mercy. Anyone who survived the first onslaught they would not spare, because they would take no prisoners. Shrugging, one by one, the men boldly picked up their personal weapons, a rather motley collection of obsolete rifles and pistols. Not much to counter the 100 or more heavily armed infantrymen we all knew would soon break through the forest perimeter and enter the compound. As I drew my gun, my last thoughts were of Jenny, wherever she was, and whether she would ever know how I met my death in a faraway land. Would she mourn for me? Would she miss me? What would she say to me when she saw my final state? I chuckled unfunnily, imagining her telling me to use the brains God gave me, her standard response when she had no other choice. Use my brains? Screw it. Sometimes you can't see what's staring you in the face. Where the hell is that firing mechanism? I shouted, not addressing anyone in particular. It doesn't work, Captain, someone echoed. It's useless. Not that one, I shouted back. The original one, modeled after it. Several people realized what I meant, and with a satisfying click, the original mechanism slid into place of the Russian pistol that had been silent and unused for so long. Ammunition! I shouted, but the two had already begun to haul the heavy metal box up to the cannon, which by this time was lined up on the tree line, from whence we knew the enemy might at any moment fall upon us. "Too late!" shouted someone as they broke through. 30 out of 40, perhaps in the first wave, pouring fire on everything that moved around them, and the light return fire of the few men left around the camp had little effect on their rapid advance. "Wrong ammo," a soldier sobbed, trying to insert a cartridge into his rifle as the attackers wiped out the small group of defenders between us and them. Perhaps it was then that Rene showed himself in all his glory. He shoved the other man out of the way, turned the ammunition roll the other way, and inserted it into the welcoming slot. Then he snatched up his pistol and swung it around to meet the first of the attackers, who by then were almost upon us, bullets flying in all directions, the screams of the wounded on both sides chilling us. Music to my ears. I'm not particularly musical even at the best of times, but the heavy hum of that beautiful Russian gun was the most beautiful music I've ever heard. We could have all died that day, but we would not leave without taking many of them with us. I didn't have time to ponder what happened to that young man who left the army years ago, not knowing if he could survive killing someone. A heavy gun pierced a gap in the attacking crowd, but a few still broke through and approached us. My gun was hot in my hand, and I shot back at them every chance I got. Some of them were so close I had to shoot into the gap between my men. We were overtaken and undertaken, and my men chopped down the ladder, sometimes literally with bayonets, just as in the old days. Then the next wave came upon us, much more numerous, but by then we were ready for it, with Rene firing his gun in short, accurate bursts, and the three of us manning it and keeping the ammunition flowing while we thanked the Lord that Rene somehow knew what he was doing and prayed to God, whom we had not had time for before, that the gun would not jam. The thing is, in the middle of a battle, you have no idea what's really going on. Maybe some general knows, but we didn't have one on hand, so we just kept fighting for our lives. Of course, we didn't know that the attackers had rushed right into our ambush, though we didn't realize we had set it up. The last thing they expected was that, having broken through our defenses, they would run into the heaviest gun positioned far from our front line. Who would have thought it? It was a ridiculous piece of military planning, so ridiculous that it turned into a bloodbath as their troops poured into the kill site and our surviving troops on the perimeter closed in behind them. I lost 4 of my men that day, including poor Rene, but we had little time to mourn them. We had no idea that they were planning their major offensive that day, and of course, the truth is that if we hadn't happened to take a machine gun out of the front line, we would have been defeated, and I would have ended up in an unmarked mass grave somewhere in a far, far away country. As it was, my only wounds were the little finger on my left hand, which was torn off so that I didn't even notice it, and a shallow wound on my chest. I could pretend it was from a bloodthirsty enemy, but it was actually done by one of my boys when he lost his grip on my bayonet. This battle didn't win the Civil War, but it definitely turned the tide. News of Omach's victory convinced various forces to side with him, seeing at last a real chance to overthrow his highly unpopular cousin. In 10 weeks, Omach had captured a major city in the country, suffering relatively few casualties on either side, and, perhaps more importantly for us mercenaries, a gold mining complex, not a very large one, but without which the huge bonus promised to us might not have been paid. Personally, I took almost no part in the skirmishes that followed, busy replenishing supplies and adding captured items to my inventory. But the day after this first major success, Omach did pull me aside to speak privately. "Brilliant military tactic to beat back a heavy gun, Captain Jones," he congratulated me, patting me on the shoulder. "Total luck," I grinned back, "but my men have performed admirably under fire." "Nonsense," he grinned, barely containing his laughter. "The tactics were perfect. We set a trap, the enemy was ambushed in a classic ambush, and we defeated a vastly superior force." "If you say so, sir," I grinned back. "Yes," he replied, winking at me. "That's what the press will hear. That's what the world will believe. And that's what my bastard cousin will have to face when he tries to rally his troops." I only smirked in response, shrugging my shoulders in agreement. "Stick to that story, Captain, and your entire crew will get a little more, and you'll get a bonus on your bonus." "Consider it done, sir," I agreed, saluting him, and wondering if I would have lived to see my bonus if I had argued. The press release did go out, however, and the world learned of Omach's brilliant strategy. It mentioned the help given by a junior officer with the rank of captain, but somehow they managed to misspell my damn name. Women? What about women? As unpleasant as it may be to some sensitive people where there are men who have money and nothing else to do with it, there will be women willing to help them with their problems. In Dubai, Olga was somewhere at the top, and the women in this hole were at the bottom. Almost all of them were lecherous older whores, and the few who had not yet reached that stage were striving for it. To their credit, I don't think it was their fault, but I refrained. There was only one of them, a pretty enough young African woman, nice enough to look at that I could be tempted. But the line was too long, and officer status offered no advantage in this situation. A dollar, pound, or euro meant more than rank or position. Unfortunately, it was unlikely to remain so attractive for long, so I abstained. That all changed as we swept through the war-torn country, women and girls hailing us as their saviors, while their own men may have died in battle or simply stayed away. It was then that my abstinence failed me. I confess I took my prize twice as a conquering hero. A prize, I might add, that went to me gratuitously on both occasions. It may not have been my finest moment, but they both seemed to enjoy it. Then everything changed again. Florence appeared. Oh, Florence, our troops had stormed into a city that was flatteringly called the capital, but was really nothing more than a small town where not a single shot had been fired. My contingent didn't arrive until a day or so later, and we set about finding a place to base ourselves, and then a place to sleep. Soldiers being what they are, and since the town was still functioning on some level, there was room on the list for a drink, and the main bar in town was quite suitable for that. Of course, we weren't alone. There were other soldiers already crowding in there with exactly the same thoughts. However, where men congregate, a certain type of woman congregates as well, though I was content to just stand and watch the merry-go-round, sipping a cold but unfortunately not very tasty beer. I knew I shouldn't have interfered, but a girlish scream caught my attention. Squeezing through the crowd that had gathered around me, I soon discovered the cause. A young woman who was being mistreated and who, unlike the other whores in the bar, was objecting rather heatedly. I forced myself to look away as it was none of my business and I didn't want to meet the eyes of the rude African soldier harassing her. I told myself I was bloody stupid even as I squeezed through them to confront them and in my best officer voice ordered them to stop. They, or rather he, stopped, but only to stare at me in bewilderment. "Mind your own damn business," he growled. "Let her go now," I barked at him, hoping it sounded a lot more confident than I felt. "Take it. Let's leave that stupid white officer alone," he tossed to his buddies, soldiers who were destroying without a second thought, probably just the day before, and they took a step toward me, smirks appearing on their faces that took my breath away. People were destroying their officers in this conflict, and I inwardly cursed myself for being such a fool and looked for a way out. The girl, whatever color she was doomed to her fate. She couldn't be saved, and that wasn't my problem. "Please." Perhaps it was the pleading tone of her voice, or maybe it was the French accent. But more likely it was the way her eyes caught mine and stared defiantly back at me. Strikingly clear, blue eyes that silently told me I was her only chance and begged me not to leave her. Idiot. Damned idiot that I was. Instead of turning away, I stood my ground, knowing there was only one way to keep them from beating the shit out of me and possibly destroying me. I pulled out my gun. My gun. My small caliber pistol that had served me so well in 2 battles. They hesitated and then apparently decided I wasn't going to use it, and even if I did, I couldn't take down more than one of them. Either way, the whole place went quiet, all eyes fixed on us, waiting to see what would happen next. "Who's first?" I gasped with laughter, waving my gun back and forth, having already decided that the guy holding the girl would go to his own first, even if the others got me. To his credit, he was a brave guy, and had obviously faced death before, realizing, perhaps from the way I handled the gun, carelessly taking it off the safety, that I knew how to use it and would use it, and that at this distance I was unlikely to miss. I could see the fear in his eyes, realizing that perhaps he too had made a fatal mistake. But he didn't flinch. As I pulled the trigger, I knew it would end badly, but it was too late to back down. Oh shit. What I'd been through, all for some damn woman I didn't even know. "Stand down," came a deep, commanding voice from somewhere behind me, a voice my mind struggled to name. "Lower your weapons, Captain. That's an order," came the next order. "Step back and let the girl go." We all hesitated, but no one moved from their seats, and there was an anxious silence in the room, save for the girl's quiet sobs. "Now!" came a sharp shout behind me, and I lowered my gun, finally recognizing the voice. The men in front of me realized who it was too, perhaps the only man in Africa who could make them back down at that moment. Put your weapons away, Captain, Oma ordered more calmly, standing between us and glaring at my opponents until they backed away, and the one holding the girl released her, albeit reluctantly, and she rushed to hug me, flooding with tears. But that didn't stop them from looking at me with hatred in their eyes, making it clear that the matter was not yet settled. Damned fools, Oma reprimanded his soldiers. You're lucky he didn't shoot you all. No such luck, one of them muttered, still looking at me angrily. You think not? Oma continued. Do you realize who this officer is? You don't recognize him? You don't recognize the man who saved your miserable lives in this hellhole just a few weeks ago? The looks of hatred disappeared and were quickly replaced by smiles. A buzz went up in the bar and suddenly every man in the bar wanted to shake my hand or buy me a drink. Split up and take the girl with you, Oma suggested quietly, keeping his eyes on the large soldier. I'll take it from here. Thank you, sir, I sighed gratefully. The adrenaline fading away and the realization of how close I was to meeting my maker came over me again. We're equals now, he grinned. Why? I asked. For spelling your name wrong, he chuckled, and then burst into laughter. His rolling laughter was infectious, and soon the whole bar joined in. Everyone including me. Everyone except the poor young woman still clinging to me. We parted. We left, and I led her down the dusty street until I found a rundown convenience store for privacy. What the hell were you doing in a bar like that? I demanded angrily, taking off my shirt and wrapping it around my shoulders. I thought they could give you a job, she wheezed, still clinging to me. Why do you need a job? I asked, calming down a little, not understanding how such a young, beautiful, white woman could be looking for work in such a war-torn neighborhood. No money, she replied simply, her French accent becoming less and less distinct as she calmed down. How old are you? 19, she replied, but I raised my eyebrows questioningly. Well, yes, 18, she admitted, but I'll be 19 this year. You're still in high school, I sighed, deciding that our 10-year age difference made her too young for me, which was a shame. Still, hell no, the girl threw back. I've heard women deny being sluts with less anger. Her recovery from the horrible ordeal surprised me. I sighed, wondering how the hell I'd gotten myself in this position. Time to get the details. Who the hell are you, young lady? And why are you here? I shouted. She was actually Belgian and had just graduated a few weeks ago from school, an expensive private boarding house in England. Her father, a Belgian diplomat, was on his way with her to South Africa, where she was to spend the summer with family friends in Cape Town. On the way, they stopped for a week so that her father could attend to official business, certain that the rebel army had gained a foothold in the south and was unlikely to survive the week. Unfortunately for them, some clever person had removed the trigger mechanism from a heavy machine gun and changed the course of the war, but of course they didn't know that. As it turned out, her name was Florence. Our return flight was cancelled and suddenly government soldiers were pouring into the city fleeing the rebels. Mon Pop argued with one of them, and they shot him dead. Did they destroy him? No, she answered, and tears ran down her cheeks at the memory. He lost a lot of blood, but the hospital was still working then and saved his life. A Red Cross plane showed up and they put him on it. I just pray he's alive. Why didn't you go with him? There wasn't room. Daddy was barely conscious and I had to let him go, she sobs, and goes on to tell how she went back to the hotel where they were staying and didn't pay much attention until she was kicked out later that day when she couldn't pay the bill. So she ended up in a bar looking for a job to earn some money. There was no chance, of course, except to lie on her back on some filthy mattress, which is where she ended up. So where are you sleeping tonight? I asked her. Where are you sleeping? She threw back nervously. We'll see about that, I hummed. Where is this hotel located? Over there, she replied, pointing to the best hotel in the place, located across the street from where we were standing. It looked pretty nice considering where we were, though in Europe it would probably be closed. I grabbed her hand and almost dragged her towards the hotel entrance, walking into the front desk looking like I owned the place. The lady wants her room back, I told the guy behind the counter, who looked Turkish but probably wasn't. She didn't pay the bill, he muttered back, ignoring me, and openly examining the rip in her shirt that was too big for her. I said the lady wants her room back, I repeated, putting my hand on the hilt of my gun, and he showed clear signs of changing his mind. Then, a handful of local currency thrown in front of him seemed to convince him. And a room for me, I continued, hesitating to refuse. You don't need one, Florence intervened, and this time it was she who took my hand, grabbed the keys off the counter, and dragged me toward the stairs. We entered the room and lay down on the bed. And I could have fallen in love with her, and maybe I did. But when I arranged for her to call her parents in Belgium, which wasn't that difficult in this horrible place, saw her burst into tears when she learned that her father was alive and well, and heard her mother's shouts of joy when she learned that her daughter was alive too, I regretfully had to let her go. 6 days later, I put her on a plane to safety, telling her that I had bought the ticket cheaply, without telling her that it had cost me a month's salary. She cried a lot from the time we got to the airport until we boarded the plane. I held back the tears until she could no longer see them. It was necessary to end the war, and we flew out the next day. The war dragged on, but it didn't end with a bang. We all got the honors we were promised, or the next of kin of those who didn't live to see the end. I myself walked away with money I could have made in 10 years back home, tax-free, safely stashed away in an offshore bank. The question was what to do with it. I spent some of the money on a layover in Dubai, and this time I flew in something more comfortable than Vladimir's old rusty box. I tried to track down the charming Neha, but in a month or so I learned that she had been transferred to Europe to run a restaurant there. I consoled myself with another Russian girl, perhaps not as beautiful as Olga, but no less enthusiastic. She too turned out to be cheaper, but perhaps because I opted for a 3-day deal. Campion's arrival at my new company, JS Components Limited, where I took a job a year or so after returning from Africa, came as a complete surprise, though perhaps it shouldn't have. We manufactured specialized gearboxes and axles, and Campion was already a customer. I had dealt with JS myself when I worked at Campion, shortly before Tom took over. They hadn't done business with JS for a long time, but then we hadn't had such an advanced gearbox for a long time. We made a deal with an American company and made a unit under license based on one of their designs, which gave us a technological advantage and allowed them to enter the European market. A good deal for both of us. We actually came up with a clever modification to their MK6 unit, which we shared with the Americans, and made an agreement to sell it as the MK7. It was all looking very promising. And then Campion came along, and all those thoughts I had kept bottled up for years came back to haunt me. What I thought was behind me was suddenly haunting me, and haunting me hard. I hated the bitch, Jenny, of course, but the reality was much more obvious. That was something I was having a hard time coming to terms with. Holding back my hatred after what I had seen and experienced was very difficult. After showing him the factory, I ran away as fast as I could. Campion, like me, was eager to put distance between us. The problem was that he needed our gearbox, and the truth, as unpleasant as it was that a good order from his company would solve our expansion plans. So Tom, good old boy that he was, happily left me to make arrangements with my old pal George. George Bloody Campion, of course. The deal was to outfit 40 of their armored response vehicles for a little-known North African branch of a French company. For those in the know, that could mean they could end up anywhere from Syria to North Korea. Money talks, of course. He wanted the MK7 box, but I convinced him that because of the delivery time, he'd be better off getting the MK6, and of course it was a bit cheaper. He agreed, or perhaps I should say he fell for it. I may not have been the great military tactician I was made out to be, but from a business standpoint, I just set a classic trap for him. If he hadn't been so uptight in dealing with me and had done his homework, he might not have gotten caught. 4 months later, I was back in Tom's office, and a rather annoyed Tom was sitting at his desk. "What the hell were you thinking, Mike?" He pounced on me. "You should have known." About the fact that Campion's cars were supposed to end up in Syria? I smirked back at him. No, I didn't know exactly, but I assumed it would be somewhere in that area. Turned out pretty good, I reckon. But for God's sake, he continued, MK6 operates under license, and the Americans have embargoed their equipment. How are you going to hide that? You don't, I agreed, trying not to smile too broadly. They're not going to get them. Damn it, who gave you the right to do something so stupid? Do I really have to answer that question? I asked, maintaining a respectful look. Okay, maybe you should, Tom sighed. So you can become a majority shareholder, but I'm staying on as managing director until I retire. Right. That's where my hard-earned salary and bonus went. I put my cushion to JS Components and, with Tom's agreement, opted for shares instead of a percentage of my salary for a while, until I got a controlling interest. But by the time this all blows up, you'll be retired and sitting on some sunny beach with your wife, I reminded him. Maybe, he agreed, but that might send us to the bottom. What the hell are we going to do with 40 semi-outdated gearboxes? 3, I grinned back, and they were already in the warehouse. What? All the gearboxes going through production are actually MK7S, and they're not under license or embargo, as you know. He knew, of course. Although it wasn't widely publicized at the time, both we and the Americans, in signing our agreement, were well aware that we both benefited from having equipment that wasn't subject to their own embargo rules. So you're going to replace the MK7 crates with older ones when the problem is discovered, he muttered almost to himself. That's right, I agreed. But not at a normal price, I suppose, Tom concluded, not fooling himself. For the first time that morning, there was a trace of a smile on his face. Extra production costs, canceling an order, reconfiguring production lines, and so on and so forth. All of that costs money. The price should be much higher. All costs we won't actually incur. Exactly, I confirmed. More profit for us and a bigger exit bonus for you, Tom. But why Mike? He finally demanded. It's not like you. The money will be welcome, but it's just not the way JS Components works. Let me tell you a story, Tom, I sighed, cringing a little at the thought of having to tell about the relationship between Campion and me and a certain woman named Jenny. But I did, and in gruesome detail, and Tom shuddered, feeling my pain as I told him about my last visit to the office and how I'd caught his wife. I think I understand, Mike, Tom told me when I finished my story. But don't let it change you. Don't let it warp your view of the world. I promised him I wouldn't let it. We broached the subject of the wine cabinet and he left me alone. Everything fell into place almost the same day, 3 months after our meeting with Tom. Campion's company had already received the 3 cases for the MK6 and had done all the engineering work to fit them to their cars. They needed more to get the production line up and running, and here I bombarded them with a barrage of suggestions. We're having a bit of a supply problem. I turned to their production manager, fortunately a man I didn't know too well since he'd been bought after I left. Hopefully there won't be any delays, he replied. We have everything ready and the first delivery should be in a few weeks. When I suggested that he might not get them, he exploded, and I had to wait for him to calm down before continuing. I suggested that he meet with his supervisor to straighten out the problem, to which he readily agreed, not realizing that I wanted to strike directly at the source of the problem. In the end, it came out as follows. What the hell do you mean you can't supply gearboxes? Campion snapped back. You've had them in production for months. If you let us down, we'll sue you. Embargo problems, I replied calmly. What embargo problems? He exploded. The French are our customers. We Brits don't have a problem with them. But our MK6 is manufactured under license from an American company, and they have a problem with a certain party in Syria. Even as I spoke those words, I could see the color leave his face. What the hell? He started but fell silent, knowing full well how I find out about such things. But you should have known when we signed the order. Why didn't you say anything? Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I smiled back at him. You bastard, he hissed, finally realizing I'd set him up. You planned the whole thing, and planned it damn well. Just like you planned the end of my marriage, I growled back, intending to take my rage out on him. I hope you and that bitch are still happy, because when I'm done with you, it might not last. I hadn't thought about what his reaction might be, but what I got wasn't what I expected at all. Campion, the big macho, ex-Royal Marine, ex-boxer, just burst into tears. My anger faded away and I stood there feeling nothing but embarrassment. I've seen grown men break down in the heat of battle, but this was different. I just felt awkward and didn't feel the glow of vengeance I expected. Jenny, he finally sobbed, we're not together anymore. I didn't know that, I told him, completely confused by my emotions. I caught her cheating on me, he explained. I forgave her, but 6 months later, she left and did it again. She promised to end it, but I put an investigator on her and found out she was dating one of my suppliers. It's been a few years now, and that couple, and probably the others too, were just fun on the side. I'm sorry, I mumbled, not knowing if it was serious or not, but not knowing what else to say. We had a big fight. I kicked her out and she went to live with her lover. I couldn't let them leave so easily, so I bankrupted the bastard. Now the couple live in a cheap rented house, drive an old wreck, and are pretty miserable by the looks of it. And rightly so, I remarked, surprised that he hadn't even noticed the similarities between his situation and mine. But I still love her, Mike. He started sobbing again. I miss her every day. Poetic justice, I murmured. But if he heard me, he didn't say anything in response. I decided our meeting was over and nothing more would happen that day. I turned and walked out of his office, doubting that he even noticed me leaving. I spent the next day trying to gather my thoughts. My earlier plans had been shattered by my meeting with Campion. Apparently, he really did love her, perhaps more than I ever had. And what did that mean? I had planned to cause him serious financial problems and perhaps even bankrupt him. But now I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure of anything at all anymore. The days spent in Carl's company had changed the way I looked at the world and everything in it. We had another meeting, or rather several, and again my plans and intentions took an unexpected turn. So much for the great tactician. I didn't have to insist on a higher price for a better gearbox, and indeed he and I hardly discussed the matter at all. Instead, to my surprise, I found myself discussing the operation of Campion's business. I just found out that you actually own JS Components. He began our next meeting. How the hell did you manage that? Came back with a shed full of money from Africa, I explained, offering no further information on exactly how I made it. I invested in JS and replaced Tom as director a couple weeks ago, but I only own a controlling interest. The other shareholders? He inquired. Old family members of the original owner. As long as they get their dividends, they don't interfere. Do you want to expand? He asked as if casually, and suddenly my interest turned entirely to him. Perhaps, I thought pertinently. Since Jenny moved out, I seem to have lost enthusiasm for the business. 5 years ago, you wouldn't have caught me on this embargo. I'm approaching retirement age, and Jenny is still small and too young to take over anytime soon, so the business may be up for sale. How much? I asked, not hiding the fact that my heartbeat had increased noticeably. He quoted an amount that seemed surprisingly reasonable, but I still wrinkled my face slightly. Campion offered a slightly lower amount, and I grimaced again. But it didn't work the second time. He wasn't that desperate. Nay, I'm not sure I can raise that amount, but I'm certainly interested. The banks will help, he offered. How about half that amount, 51%, I suggested. And he sat looking at me, pondering. That would give you a controlling interest. He pointed out the obvious. That's good, but can I trust you? I sighed, seriously considered my answer, and concluded that I no longer hated the man. And after interacting with him for the past few months, he didn't even disgust me. I checked on Jenny's condition, and it was just like he said it would be. She was... well, she just didn't live in my world anymore. She was a nobody in my mind. I think you can do it, I said finally. Believe me, I really think you can do it. I think I believe you, he replied, smiled, and held out his hand for me to shake. I had to check for skeletons in the closet, and there were none. The deal was agreed and it went through, giving me the option to buy back the remaining shares at any time over the next 5 years. I would become managing director, and George, at my suggestion, would remain chairman. It was amazing how easily two men who had been cheated on by the same woman became close. He was to become chairman of the board, but planned to stay in the background to spend more time with his young daughter Ginny, over whom he had custody. As I got to know her better, I was relieved to discover that while she was undeniably beautiful, I was clearly not her father. It suddenly seemed to me that I had gone from a humble man to the head of my own small, but growing engineering empire. However, I still had a private life. Casual liaisons with very attractive women were fun, but not what I was looking for in the long run. I wanted a beautiful young woman who would become my wife, settle down in some suburb, have 2.5 children, and of course a dog. Maybe in time? The new position gave me more opportunities to travel, and I easily arranged a trip to Mumbai, where I knew for a fact lived the lovely Neha, who had moved there to work as a number 2 for her father in their hotel and restaurant business. This is Mike from Dubai, I introduced myself, calling her. Which one? She replied, rather disappointed, though of course a lot of water had flowed under many bridges by then. The one with the scar, I replied, wondering if she would remember. or if I was going to make a fool of myself. "Oh yeah," she said encouragingly. "Killed any other baddies lately?" "Just a few," I laughed back, wondering how she'd react if she found out how truthful my answer was. We chatted some more, reacquainting ourselves, and agreed to meet up later that night. I asked her out to dinner, but she declined, suggesting we go to some fancy bar she knew. "Not hungry?" I joked. "Just for you," she laughed back. "We have a lot to do." Suddenly, I didn't feel hungry either. The bar was very fancy, very exclusive, and if I hadn't been with Neha, I probably would have had a hard time getting in there. Neha was as sophisticated and beautiful as I remembered her to be. "You left me very disappointed that night, Mike," she admitted. "You're not the only one," I admitted in response. "Come on, let's go meet the crowd," she said, and dragged me to the center of the place where all of Mumbai's young and rich crowd seemed to have gathered. The fact that Neha didn't stand out too much in the crowd was a testament to how beautiful the girls were. I was introduced in a whirlwind, but I only remembered the names of a few girls and no men, and soon found myself being passed from girl to girl on the dance floor, all eager to meet the soldier of fortune who had returned from the war. I don't know what fantastic stories Neha was telling them, but I soon stopped denying that I was SAS, a James Bond-style spy, a UN general, and even a paid assassin. Admittedly, I managed to calm down one girl who asked me if it was true that I was a member of the royal family. The guys were surprisingly cooperative considering how popular I was with their girls, though perhaps the stories, the missing finger and the scar on my cheek made them wary. A few of us settled into a private apartment nearby. Neha was with us, or at least I think she was, but the booze I swallowed that night clouded my brain and the rest of the night passed like a blur. The next morning didn't come until noon, and I woke up wondering where the hell I was. I realized I was at least within a few hundred square miles, and only then realized I wasn't alone in the bedroom. "Finally awake?" She laughed delightedly. "Unless you're an angel," I grinned back, unsure if even a naked angel could be as beautiful as this girl I didn't even recognize. "Breakfast?" she asked. "Who are you?" I demanded, remembering the night before. "What are you doing here?" "I drew the long straw," she replied, bursting into laughter at her joke. "How's that going?" I joked back. "I don't know yet. You were completely out of it when I helped you back to my room," she informed me. "Where's Neha?" "You mean Nah?" She smiled back at me. "I have no idea, and I don't care. So who's having breakfast, me or breakfast?" I did end up having breakfast, but as you can imagine, not until 4 or 5 hours later. The next week was just incredible. I managed to meet up with Neha and even spent the last couple nights with her. Eventually, my excuse to stay there dried up, and I was forced to leave India and return to the UK, vowing that I would be back soon, telling Neha that I would come back for her. However, other opportunities came in the form of a girl from my past and I did not return, never seeing the beautiful Neha again. 7 years later, when India and Africa were just a memory, albeit a vivid one, I was running not 2 but 3 successful businesses. A medium-sized manufacturing company came along that suited our profile, and we joined it. The new company was based in Belgium and had close family ties, which allows me to jokingly refer to our business as multinational. All this, and the fact that I was very happily married to a beautiful, slightly younger woman and would soon be a father again, made me a very contented man. The days of abuse were in the past, but there was still one tough decision to make in about a month, give or take a week or so. It was about what to name the boy we were expecting, Mike after me or Jean-Paul after my wife's father. Either way, he would join his adorable 2-year-old little sister, whom we named Florence, after her mother, of course. And at this point, I hope I've left enough clues for you readers to guess how my story arrived at such a happy and quite satisfying finale. I finally have a truly loving wife, a wife who still enjoys telling anyone and everyone how her husband will always be her hero, and how he once saved her from a terrible fate. Maybe someday I will embarrass her the way she embarrassed me, by telling someone all the details. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed. Subscribe to my channel and watch for the next video.